can you explain quantum theory?
No, I cannot explain quantum theory because quantum is not a theory. Quantum is a mathematical tool that was elevated to theory status because relativity failed to describe what was happening at the small level. I can't describe it. I can't explain it, and neither can anybody else in the world. And that should be an indication that maybe we're on the wrong track, okay? But no, quantum is a mathematical tool, and it's a cry for help from a failed core model.
That's in this moment right here, I just thought of like a quick question. Can you name 3 theories that, as you just explained quantum right now, what would be your 3 most invaluable garbage theories that society is being fed right now? Your top 3.
The top
3 worst.
3 most ridiculous theories out there. The Big Bang, okay? Child story. That's a bedtime story for a child. It doesn't explain anything. It's where they stick all of the unwanted theories and they call it a day. It came out of the Big Bang. Yeah, right. That's the worst. And the second one is the most recent, and that was the need to insert dark matter and dark energy into the model. There is zero proof that either of those exist. We made an observation that disproved Einstein's gravitational theory, and they plugged in dark matter. Created another problem. The universe should be expanding. If there's dark matter, it would collapse. Plug in dark energy. Neither of them have any foundation in scientific observations. It's simply to defend Einstein's core theory, which is wrong. Or admit it. And the third is the use of fundamental forces. Both quantum and relativity are 100% dependent on there being fundamental forces, which defies everything we know about physics. There's no such thing as perpetual motion. There's no such thing as motion without some type of energy exchange. We know that 3,000 years of experimentation, yet they base both core theories on fundamental forces. You remove them and both quantum and relativity collapse into a heap, which they should. So when we come up with a new theory, we have to do it without the use of fundamental forces, without the use of making up stuff that potentially does not exist. We need to have proof for all this stuff.
Interesting. I have to confess, I'm surprised that string theory didn't hit your top 3 list garbage theories.
Yeah, it's not big enough. It's in its infancy. String theory.
Let's loop around.
Yeah, string theory. So particle physics has been the scientific boondoggle for the last 50 years, 60 years. Now particle physics has run its course. Physicists have to publish papers. They have to write books in order to advance, in order to have tenure. So they're incented to write. Well, they run out of things to write. So particle physics has been feeding them for years. It's run its course. They've made enormous investments. They're getting absolutely no benefit out of it. So now you plug in string theory. Well, that's a really good one because it has no basis in any type of scientific observation. It's an unlimited creative writing opportunity for the physicists, and they're going to feed off of that for the next 20 years. Complete waste of time.
Did you see that video of Homer Simpson? We posted it, and in it, the conspiracy of where they said that Homer wrote a derivative of the closest version of the mathematical equation of the God particle, like 20 years before the God particle was actually even discovered. Now, my reason why I asked you this...
Hey, Homer's as credible as...
No, the reason why I asked you this to address it is because, is it your opinion, or how I viewed it, working with you and studying this ether energy for so long, does it feel like the media is part of feeding into, contributing and perpetuating the fallacies of these theories?
I don't know.
Like the God particle doesn't exist.
They needed to find something to justify another $10 billion investment into a super collider. So they predicted that the God particle was there, and then it would tie quantum with relativity, and it was going to be the end-all answer. 20 years later, it's, ho-hum. It's sort of dismissed. Now they're moving on to the next shiny object, for probably string theory. I don't think there's a conspiracy, but the only problem is that all truth comes from the industry. Nobody has the time to go through and study all this stuff. It's too complicated the way it's done today. So then they call a physicist, they call a tenured professor, and they say, is this right? Well, the guy's going to say, yes, it's right. If you ask him enough questions, he's going to say, I don't know, which is their response to everything when you dig down. We really don't know, which isn't very satisfactory. But I don't think the media is a problem. I think their dependence upon the talking heads, the experts, have put them in a position where, in order to write an article, they got to believe what these guys are telling them.
Mm.
If you don't believe them, if you say, man, that just doesn't make sense, and you're a reporter, you're not going to get your article printed. Not in Scientific American or any of the institutional magazines.
You're going to stop getting interviews.
You stop.
People are going to
looking to you. It's what's interesting is back in the 1600, we saw the same thing happen, where all of the experts, physics experts, were beholden to the church, Catholic Church, and the Bible was the gold standard for the Catholic Church. And we saw the observations from Galileo that showed the planets doing really strange things. And rather than admitting, hey, maybe this Earth isn't the center of the universe, they tossed it over to mathematicians. And then the mathematicians created these enormously complex models with retroorbits and crap like that.
Uh-huh.
We're doing the same thing today.
Really?
Yeah, we're seeing stuff that defies the core model, and we've got retroorbits going on, basically. It's going to take an enormous disruption to break the status quo momentum that's been there now for 110 years. But in order to progress, it has to be broken. It's a tough call. We are not educating people. They're being indoctrinated into the Church of Einstein. And, if they question Einstein, they're not going to get a good grade. They will not graduate top of their class. They're not going to end up at MIT getting their PhD, and they're not going to advance to a tenured physicist. So they have to repeat what the teachers teach them. And what the teachers teach them, which is clearly wrong, and they know it's wrong, yet they continue to do it over and over and over again. And that kind of pisses me off, that we are condemning the next generation of brilliant young minds to make the same mistakes that the previous generation of brilliant minds has suffered from for the last 100 years, basically. Mm-hmm. And that cycle has to be broken. We need to encourage critical thinking. And I can't see any way that's going to happen, because these guys are so heavily invested in Einstein's theories that they risk their careers if they deviate off script. So we're not doing it maliciously, but we are unintentionally brainwashing some of the most brilliant people that we have in the world. And it happens in Russia, it happens in China, it happens in India, it happens in the U.S. Where the doctrine, the physics doctrine that they have to subscribe to is broken. Yet they don't even talk about that. They don't even talk about all the problems that the physics is having. They teach things that are pure theory to students as if they're factual, as if they know what they're talking about, and they don't. If the student questions them and says, explain this to me, and they can't explain it, and they complain about that, they're not going to get a good grade. And it's just this ugly cycle that leaves us stuck. That's got to change.
But when you say they're not going to get a good grade, hypothetically speaking, if a student on an exam or in turning in their papers wrote that
the Big Bang's a crock of shit,
and their version of explaining why it's a crock of shit, they're going to receive a failing mark for their explanation, because it doesn't match with, even though they're presenting a debate or a valid substantiating of some facts of to disclaim it?
No.
You're not allowed to disclaim it.
No, well, you can, but your professor's not going to like it. If your professor doesn't like it, if your professor doesn't like it, he's not going to give you a good grade. If he doesn't give you a good grade, you don't get into a good school. And if you get really frustrated with what's going on, you're ultimately going to bail on it. You're going to go work for Google or somebody else. You're not going to waste your career in the physics institution. So yeah, it's something that has to be fixed. And the other thing that really, really bothers me is the lack of logic in what they're coming up with. There doesn't seem to be any litmus test of logic. If the math works, it's all hunky-dory. And, we've completely surrendered theoretical physics to mathematicians. And that's not the scientific way. You need creativity in there. You need an Albert Einstein brain who's free to think about stuff. If Einstein lived today, and he knew all that we know, all that we've learned over the last 100 years since he went away, he would never have come up with general relativity. There's no way. There's too much information today that would disprove that possibility. So, Nikolai Tesla did the best he could to try to influence and try to correct things. Nikolai Tesla was the first one to introduce an ether energy, which is what we've returned to. But unfortunately, the guy was a little bit of a pain in the ass and wasn't very popular and very articulate, and kind of got booed out of the room.
So when you say that if Einstein was around today, he would say that his own theories were incorrect.
Yes. If he had posted his theories post-1920, we would have an ether in the model. If the properties might not be identified properly by Einstein back then, but there would be an ether in the model. He told us that in 1920. So, boom, I made a mistake. I spent 40 years of my life riding my bicycle around Princeton, hoping to fix that mistake. We didn't do it. So, at some point, if you want to trust Einstein, fix the theory.
So he said I made a mistake, and where he made the mistake, but never went back and fixed it, or wasn't allowed to go back and fix it.
Yeah, the institution moved on. So he said in 1920, hey, I can't imagine relativity without an ether. But he'd already removed ether from the model. And all the guys that were now at the top, at the kingpins in the physics industry, at the top, did not want to go back and revisit that argument. And that was the big argument between Einsteinian physics and Newtonian physics, was the removal of physical properties of empty space. So when they did that, they basically shelved Einstein. Then they had the argument about quantum and quantum being a theory or a science. And so he would never have done general relativity.
What did they land on? Is quantum a theory or a science?
No, it's a mathematical tool. It's fantastic, and the technology business is good. It's a predictive mathematical tool. If you do this 16 times, then it will predict what the probability of doing it the 17th time. It's incredibly useful in the tech industry. But it's not a science. A theory should explain something. That doesn't explain anything. That's the conversion of an observation into a mathematical formula, is quantum. And Einstein said that. He goes, this doesn't explain anything. And he was absolutely right. But again, these guys in charge now did not want to rock the boat, because you rock the boat, people fall out. And they were really fat and happy, and so they're going to plow ahead. Now, they expected to discover something that would fix everything. But they're looking so far in the weeds that they're not going to discover anything. And they fail.
Haven't discovered anything yet.
No. God only knows how many billions of dollars they spent, how many, endless experimental cycles they've been through, and we are farther now from a unified theory of physics than we were 50 years ago. It just gets farther and farther apart. And that's, kind of discouraging. But again, it's a It's a catch-22.
What does it take for a theory to be accepted and acknowledged?
You need a stamp of approval from the institutional physicists. They need to bless it in order for it to get into... You can't do a TED Talk unless you get a stamp from the institutional physicists saying this isn't misinformation. This is worth talking about. You can't get an article printed in any of the industry magazines unless you have approval. You can't get a grant without approval. It's a self-policing system that has no interest in significant change, and that's a sick situation. And until that's recognized and remedied, we're going to continue to spin our wheels. Now, for most of us, we don't give a crap. It doesn't affect our daily lives. Well, they're coming up with anything that's going to have any impact on the way we live. But we're really interested in things like consciousness and, is there a purpose to life, and how does it interact with the physical behavior of the universe? That's of interest. But the current foundational model doesn't even attempt to address that. So all of us are tuned out, and nobody pays attention. I think they need to pay enough attention to demand more for the billions of dollars and the educational investment that we're making. We have to demand there.
So why does the world need more Eric Weinsteins?
Eric Weinstein and Sabine are two people with credible credentials questioning the status quo. They are not on the inside, but they're poking the bear. We need more people to do that. They need people to support them. And I think that their popularity is growing and they're getting some critical mass. We need the physics establishment to go on the defensive and to justify some of the things they're telling us, because they can't. Now, I don't think that either Sabine or Eric go far enough. All they do is question stuff. They don't have a solution to provide. We're trying to provide a solution. It may or may not be right. It works with all scientific observations, and it's a gross simplification of what we got today. It's logical, but we need to give these guys a new target to go for. And I think Eric and Sabine are two people that are trying to stimulate change from very different angles. Sabina's attacking the institutional physics, the horrible way that it's run, and Eric's after some of the crazy theories.
Why are scientists so afraid to question Einstein's outdated theories? In your opinion, why do you feel that these scientists are so afraid to question?
The orthodoxy, the science institution, is very similar to a religious institution. If you disagree with the agreed on talking points, you get excommunicated. If these guys put their head up and say, hey guys, this is really stupid, they are out. They're going to lose their tenure. Nobody's going to talk to them. They're not going to be making decisions about funding. So they can't deviate off script without jeopardizing their career. Now, the only guys who can are the guys with Nobel Prizes. And some of them are saying some really interesting things, but nobody picks them up because they're picking them up as dangerous to their careers. These guys spent $500 million on their education, 20 years of their lives trying to get to the point where they're at the top of their field.
$500 million in their education?
It's got to be 15 years if you want to go through a PhD program. And then they're indentured servants for, X number of years. And then they finally get up to a level. They're not going to risk that. They've got kids in college. They've got mortgages. They're not going to risk their financial and their career to take a risk for change. Why? Let somebody else do that. Let somebody else take the bullet. So it's a really difficult problem.
It's interesting. Tim Draper's son, first Jen told me about it, and then you spoke about it yesterday also. Seems like he's encouraging these young scientists or physicists or scientists in general to take a risk on.
Yeah. He's offering a, he knows that the education process in physics is incredibly flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's providing a path for creative young physicists to practice their passion and be supported financially and with lodging and so forth if they leave their schools, if they get out of the status quo meat grinder. And it's a really interesting thing to do. Hopefully something good will come out of that. But again, it's, these are individuals, and I just can't see any way of breaking through the theoretical physics barrier, because they're not going to see anything in astrophysics, anything different. We can't travel out to space. We can't see what's happening at the micro. So I think it's going to be really difficult for them to accomplish it. But Adam's in there saying, hey, you're wasting your time in school. Don't take on $200,000 in debt. Let's go try to do this in a disruptive fashion. And I think it's a fantastic thing he's doing.
Do you think we should have more entrepreneurs that are doing things like this? Like, what is the answer for supporting and motivating and incubating this change in direction? This risk taking. It's all, everything's a risk. What Einstein and Nikola Tesla was doing, and hundreds of other very talented scientists and physicists, I think, in a day.
Yeah, what changes industries, what changes the technology industry, what changes the automobile industry is competition. It's creativity on the outside coming in and doing it better than they do it. These big bureaucracies, and physics is a giant bureaucracy, they don't change well. Nimble little companies will come in and completely change the lanes. We've seen that for the last 20 years. In physics, it's a monopoly. These guys control everything, and they cannot self-police. They don't have the capability of doing that. They are all in, and if they deviate off script, they are out. So it is not a tolerant industry, and there is no competition. We need competition. We need debate, and it's really hard to do within the institution. The other problem is the people that end up going into physics, the creative people that come out of college and say, hey, I want to be a physicist. By the time they get through their undergraduate program, they realize, man, there's no room here. They select against creativity. They want people that can memorize and regurgitate. They want people that can kiss a professor's ass to get an A, to get the PhD program. So the guys that are creative, you weed it out. And if they get into the physics, a lot of, like Sabina, she self-reads. She goes, I can't take this anymore. And she got the guts to question the status quo. And she was excommunicated for a while. Now she has a personality, and she's got a podcast as she's working her way back in. But, it's the guys that are going to fix this thing are not in institutional physics today. I don't think.
I'm not saying I disagree with you, but I think that the people are, in my opinion, that do I agree that they're not in institutional physics? Yes. I also think that it comes from part of who's funding this. Like when you trace it back, who's funding this?
So the guys that provide the
yes.
The guys that, so the way the funding works, you think, the National Science Foundation is providing all these funds, and they do provide, they actually write the checks. But the guys that approve the projects to get the funds are the institutional physicists. They're the guys that are drinking the Kool-Aid and are protecting the status quo. So to break the funding model, you've got to have disruption from the outside, basically forcing the National Science Foundation to question the physicists who want to spend another $8 billion looking for crap that doesn't exist. Pull the plug on the dark matter research. It doesn't exist. It is a mathematical Band-Aid put on a flawed gravitational theory. And until some outside pressure comes in and makes these guys who are doing the funding less incestuous, we're going to keep dumping dough into stuff that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, this is going to piss off every university if it gets traction, every university in the country, because they feed off the same teat. They're getting grant requests to do stuff. They have a hard time finding stuff to do. What do I write my grant request for? And to get it approved, it's got to be written in a way that confirms what these guys want you to say. And it's a terrible structure. And it's one that is designed to protect the status quo, and it has to be broken from the outside. You need Elon Musk. You need Sergey Brin. You need guys on the outside who finally say, this stuff is bullshit. This doesn't make any sense. And when those guys start rattling the cage, and people who have such a status, hopefully change happens. The disruptors, the guys who have done amazing things in the world, need to engage, but they need to have something to engage around. And my hope is that proposing an alternate theory that, again, may be right or wrong, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we have today. They've got something to compare what we have today with. And then they can start asking questions, specific questions. How do you justify using fundamental forces? The physicists have no answer for that. They have none. And if you push them, I pushed a physicist once. I said, it was what powers the atom.
Mm-hmm.
And you push and push and push. And it was over a bottle of wine, so the guy was a little bit loose. He goes, we may never know. It's the hand of God, but definitely the hand of God. I said, well, that is really poetic. But that's not very scientific. And that's
He confessed.
That's not a very satisfying answer. But if you dig into any of these things, they ultimately have to say, I don't know. We don't know. We hope to discover that. And the problem is they're not going to discover it unless they fix the problem that got them into the position where they got a bunch of crap they cannot explain. You see, Einstein had a great quote. You can't solve a problem using the same logic that got you into trouble in the first place.
Right, sure.
And now that's what we're doing. We're in this mess where you have bifurcated theories. You're having zero progress in so many frontiers in physics. This conflicting theories, confusion out the kazoo, and we're still using the same theories to try to fix the problem that we used that got us into this mess. I mean, that's insanity.
Yeah.
And that's got to change.
The same tools to fix that old problem.
Einstein's theory of relativity got us into quantum. It's quantum that got us into fundamental forces, and it just keeps, the pile of manure just keeps building higher and higher and higher, and you can't dig your way out unless you're back in the center. You got to go back to 1920 and fix the problem.
But I think part of the problem, like you just identified right now, I think part of the problem legitimately is the fact that at some point in time, the answers to the questions stopped evolving.
Yeah, after a couple, 3 generations, what's things that sounded ridiculous when they came out, like the God particle, makes it into the mainstream. And the people stop asking questions. Nobody asks, what powers the atom. Nobody's looking at that. It's a fundamental force.
Mm-hmm.
They're off doing different stuff, but they're doing different stuff built off that flawed foundation. And that's the problem. They don't ask questions. The Big Bang, nobody thought the Big Bang was real when it first came out. Nobody thought there was an expanding universe. Yeah.
So why does it sound so convincing to people? Like, it had started in 10 seconds before the universe, and this explosion, that explosion, and this, and then, yeah.
Well, they look at the Big Bang timeline, right? And the Big Bang timeline has, here's where quarks came from, here's where gravity started, boom, boom, and it all happened in the first second. So they've got this timeline, so it looks like, well, geez, those guys must really know what they're talking about. All right? They couldn't write down this so accurately. And they made these predictions. Well, first of all, we can't even measure 10 to the minus 43 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That's beyond.
Yeah.
43 zeros and a 1.
And 10 to the minus.
Give me a break. And they load this thing up with all of the dumb theories that we're expected to believe. And then they put it out there, and people look at it and go, man, that is ridiculous. This is 13.8 billion years ago, which, by the way, is an estimate. They can't even tell when it started.
Oh.
But they write it up in such great detail. And they have libraries full of this stuff. So we go, oh man, they must know what they're talking about. These guys are really smart. No, they don't. No, they've been hoodwinked like all the rest of us. This is legacy theories that survive the idiocy chest.
So we never vocalized that before. Not only do we have false theories, we got improper, incorrect documentation to back up these false theories.
We have libraries full of detailed explanations on these particles they find in the super colliders that they cannot see, they cannot test, they disappear after 10 to the minus 16 seconds. They have libraries full of these things, and it's all wrong. I mean, I'm not a book burner, but that stuff is it's kindling. That's a failed science. That's like alchemy was back in the 1500s. You're not going to turn lead into gold. It's a flawed theory. It's all wrong. And we're gonna recreate the Big Bang. You can't recreate something that didn't happen. But man, they can fundraise on that. They fundraised on that for 30 years.
They made a TV show for that.
By the way, the TV show's great. The TV show, they admit that they're wrong.
Yes.
At least, they after all the years they've went through, they admit that they're wrong. So anyway, that's a problem.
Join the conversation at beyondeinstein.org.